Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have on the show Sophie Reynolds. How are you doing, Sophie?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Phil. It's really good to be here. And yeah, finally chat to you about all of this.
Yeah. So, the word finally definitely, being highlighted there because I've, I've unfortunately had to rearrange a number of our episodes, which I've had to do a lot in the last few months. So, apologies for that, and thank you for bearing with us, and so you can come and share our story today. So, really appreciate that.
No worries at all. It's really good to be here.
Cool. So what we really like to do in these episodes is just go back before there was potentially any sort of issues that you had, any health issues that you ended up having, and just understand a little bit about what life was like before then from a health perspective. Did you always have some sort of chronic issues, or or were there just like telltale signs, or were you just a completely healthy child and maybe teenager? And could you just take us through that initial part of the story?
Yeah, sure. I think if you asked me that question, it's 5.5 years ago when I got ill, I probably would have said, no, absolutely no issues. I've always been totally fine. I was a really healthy, happy child. But having learned everything I've learned in the 5.5 years, there were so many telltale signs. I don't think I've ever had a brilliant immune system. I was always that person that got sick. Growing up, I have lots of allergies. I had things like eczema. Um, I just remember being ill a bit as a child, not in a big way, just like if there was a cold going around, there's no doubt I would get that. But I think what happened 5.5 years ago, I was seemingly healthy. I was in a really stressful, busy job. I was working as a prison officer and doing a full-time master's alongside it. So it was a really intense program that I was on. I was working extremely long hours. I was doing shift work, so really antisocial hours as well. Um, and I think, I probably was in the fittest condition I've ever been in. Like I was doing a lot of exercise. I was eating only like the purest of foods. I was a bit obsessive. And that obsession and control and hyperfixation on like living the most productive life, I think sort of led to me getting really ill. And what, I don't know if you want me to go on to what sort of happened, but I think
No.
on the outside I looked fine, but actually inside there was so much going on. And it almost happened overnight. I just woke up one day feeling a bit under the weather. I had a sort of virus, the doctor thought, for a couple of weeks, and that virus just never left. I never got I never got my energy back. I was just permanently exhausted, and I couldn't believe that when the doctor said that I could have this for like 6 months. I thought, I can't have this for 6 months. This doesn't work with my life. It doesn't align with how I live my life right now. Like I've got things to do. I've got stuff to do. I've got exercise to get on with. I've got this regime to fulfill. I can't be ill or in bed for 6 months. Um, and alas, here we are 5.5 years later. And I wouldn't say I'm fully recovered, but I'm probably about 90% there.
Um, First of all, prison officer. Wow, that is
Yeah.
alongside doing a master's. So not only do you want to do what I can only assume would be one of the most difficult jobs out there, you want to do a master's alongside it as well.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's kind of like a scheduled program. I wasn't like very unique in doing that. A lot of people do it. It's like a grad scheme. You leave uni and they put grads who want like a challenging graduate role into prisons, and they sort of sell it to them by saying you can get a master's as well. And I love that company. I love the grad scheme. I love everything it stands for. I think it's a brilliant idea. And so many people, a bit like what we were saying before we came on here, like so many other people were in that situation alongside me. I have amazing friends and colleagues who did that 2-year program with me. None of them have become chronically ill like I have. So it's something to do with my nervous system, like my functioning, that has led me to permanent sort of stress response in that environment.
Yeah, that and also it's really interesting what you said about the 6 month thing. So I remember the beginning, like thinking, oh, I can't, surely this, if this just lasts one more month, this will be like, enough for me. And like, yeah, that's even
Yeah.
that feels like too much.
Yeah.
And then, if someone had offered me, like now, if they'd offered me 3, 4, 5 years or whatever it ended up being, then I would have taken it. And it's just so
Yeah.
interesting that you almost like lose track of time when you're in this thing.
Totally. I remember I'll never forget this moment. I remember sitting in a doctor's surgery, bawling my eyes out. This woman who wasn't normally my usual doctor, I was just seeing her because I was going to the doctor every day at this point. I was so anxious. I needed to run like every step of my day past the doctor. And this lady said, well, in such a blasé manner, she was like, well, you could have this for 6 months. You better just start resting up. And I thought, you have no idea the impact that's gonna have on me. I can't do this for 6 months. I can't do this for another day. Like, please, someone tell me what it is that I've got, what I need to do. Like, what do I need to do? I'll do anything. Like, give me some steps to do. Give me some tools that I can use to get myself better. But the reality was no one knew why I was ill. No one knew how long it was gonna last. No one knew what it was. And there certainly wasn't any toolkit. That was down to me to figure that out. And it's only like over the years, and I'm sure you're sort of exactly the same. I think a lot of people are from this situation. There's only so much advice a medical professional can give you. Like ME used to be known as the yuppie flu. That's what I was diagnosed with in the end. But I know the symptoms associated with CFS and ME are very similar to that of people who've had Lyme's disease, people who've had long COVID, and a myriad of other illnesses. And there isn't a solution. It's just sort of rest up, get better, take it slower, maybe cut the stress out of your life. You're like, right, cool, got it.
Yeah. Oh god. And was this done on the NHS?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a doctor. It was a really great doctor just around the corner from where I lived. Um, I was actually under their care at the time for an eating disorder, which also contributed to the illness. I now know in hindsight. So I knew them very well. I was quite familiar with all the doctors. And um, yeah, this was just sort of another thing. I felt like a real problem person. I was about to say problem child, but I was 23,
Oh,
24,
yeah.
23. Yeah.
And then 'cause with the NHS, so for those who are not from the UK, National Health Service, so obviously it's amazing that we have this free service. So if you break a leg or you're about to die, you can
Hmm.
get treated for free, and it's amazing. When it's a chronic thing, they will you know, you get first of all, it's I don't know what it was like for you, but and for me and for others I've spoken to, it takes ages for them to actually get you a referral because obviously for them to spend money on a specialist, it's a lot. And then to actually go and see that specialist, it can be like sometimes like, you wait like 2, 3, 4 months and then you finally see them and you're all like geared up to see them. And then they're like, oh yeah, you know, I can't do anything or whatever, or they
You're in
patch
and out in 10
first.
minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So could you talk a little bit about that experience? You said you saw that doctor. What actually happened then, and did he refer you on?
Yeah. So I think within about a month of having the symptoms, he said, he kind of said, told me to monitor them. And he basically said within a month that if you still have these symptoms within 6 months, I can then refer you for what I think might be chronic fatigue or ME. They're sort of interchangeable, those terms, but depends on
Yeah.
who you are. So I just say CFS ME. Um, so I think I got to the 6 month mark. And then I was referred. It was probably a further 9 months from then that I actually saw a first consultant who was able to diagnose me with ME. And honestly, almost thinking about it could make me cry because I went under so much anxiety and stress and those like year and a bit, not knowing what it was I had and not knowing what it was I had to do to fix myself. And I didn't have the money at the time to pay for a private specialist. I didn't have the intuition and the help I needed to like maybe even consider that as an option because I didn't even know who to go to Who was I supposed to go to? I might have MECFS. I could have Googled a few consultants, paid £300 to see someone for an hour for them to confirm a diagnosis. And I wasn't even sure what that would result in. It probably would have required me to buy more sessions, like with a psychiatrist or with I don't know. I don't know who I was going to go to because it was just like she's stressed and she's got ill. Like there was no like a diagnosed illness. There wasn't Lyme's disease. I couldn't go see a Lyme specialist. I couldn't see, I don't know, an MS specialist. I couldn't see a cancer specialist. There was no like physical diagnosis. There was nothing wrong with me. All my blood tests came back as completely normal. And this might sound like horrific to say, and I wouldn't wish cancer or any horrible illness on anyone, but I actually wish at that point, I remember thinking, I just wish I had something to confirm what it was that I was experiencing. Like if that was cancer, at least it would explain how I felt, whereas nothing was there to say, don't worry, it's fine. You're feeling like this because of this. It was just an unknown set of symptoms for an unknown cause, and there would be an unknown solution. And I thought, right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. But then, getting on Instagram, I'm sure we'll go into this in a minute, but I've ended up starting doing Pilates, and that introduced me to a whole new community. And then I got online on social media, and then I found a whole new world out there of people who were experiencing the same symptoms, who were in the same situation. And that is extremely comforting. And I'm sure you found the same, like through this podcast, through like reaching out, through finding a community, you have, I don't know, sort of comfort in other people having that same experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. But it's really like crazy. Yeah, what you said there about the cancer thing. I found myself thinking the same thing.
Mm.
And
And it
I
almost
think,
feels weird to say on a podcast like this. You're like, can I say that?
well, of
But
course. Well,
that's how it felt.
I
So
think
I'm
if
glad
anyone's,
you feel.
I think if anyone's going to understand, it's going to be anyone who's listening to this right now. I think it's more.
Exactly, yeah.
I think now I know what I know, and now I've kind of like now I don't think that because obviously I don't want to die, and but it's yeah. At that time, like I definitely thought it because it's the mental side of it is equally, if not worse, as bad as the physical side of it because of just the never ending and the helplessness. How were you? And we'll go into the social media stuff, but how were you dealing with this from a like? Who are the people around you at that point that gave you support or helped you? Like, how did you find that side of things?
I felt really lonely. I don't think because I didn't know what it was, I didn't really have ways to communicate how I was feeling very well. Um, to people around me. I think my friends and my colleagues were the ones that were there around me at the time I got ill. I had to go back to work within like 6 weeks, and I wasn't in the right state to go back to work. But if I didn't go back, I wouldn't have got my master's degree and I wouldn't have completed this program that I was on because I was like slap bang in the middle of a 2-year grad scheme. And the colleagues around me who I was on this program with were extremely supportive. They didn't know what was wrong, but they were very good at just accepting that it wasn't right. And they could see that like extreme change in how I was and my energy levels. They were there, right from the start. They saw how I was a few weeks before, and then they saw how I was 6 weeks later when I came back to work. So they knew and sympathized, I guess, with that. I think my family, I think were confused. I don't think they also weren't there right by my side, still going into work, like able to help. I was living in London. I went back every now and then, but I don't think they understood and could help me in the way that they would have liked to because they didn't know what to do. But weirdly, I think my dad is the only person I think could relate to it on another level because he actually had something similar when he was about my age or a little bit younger than me when I got it. So probably in his late teens, early 20s. So he could identify with those symptoms, which was helpful. I guess having someone to say, oh yeah, I had that once, but not really ever having it diagnosed at his time. But from talking to him now, he like 100% had ME. at a very similar time with me, going through a very similar sort of period, a transition period, a bit of like a lost period. Like, what am I doing? What's my purpose? Who am I? Like, he's got very similar personality traits, which I think apply to a lot of people who end up getting ME or like chronic fatigue type symptoms or chronic disease. It's like type A, very driven, like wanting to be productive, a perfectionist trait. Like my dad identifies with all of those traits. So I can see why he might have had a similar experience when he was my age.
Mm, yeah, it sounds. I mean, again, it's just like I wouldn't say carbon copy, just so similar to myself and other people I've had on the podcast. Of like, actually, some people have like really, they'll have like a parent maybe that is just gets it from the beginning, and and I'm always like a little bit. I try not to be, but I'm always a little bit jealous of that.
Mm.
Like, having someone like,
Yeah.
or they just happen to have a functional doctor as a parent or an uncle or something like that. Um, but I
Yeah.
think in most cases, yeah, it's similar to yourself. It's not like anyone around you was being necessarily unsupportive, but I always try to think of what I would be like in their position, and I think I'd probably be quite similar. It's difficult to help someone when you don't really know what's going on, but that in itself, I think it's more just symptomatic of the way society's set up for chronic illness, but particularly the traditional medical system. Were your parents, like my parents? I mean, they're quite pretty old, but like they are definitely from a generation of they trust everything the doctor says. Like if the doctor says something,
Mm.
it's true. Is it your parents like that as well, or?
I definitely think they're of that generation as well. Yeah. Like if a medical doctor has signed you off for something, that holds so much more worth than like a holistic approach of, I don't know, all the things I've done to recover have not involved like a medical doctor. They're very practical. It's like, what's the problem? What's the solution? Whereas I think the approach to recovering from a chronic illness is so much more holistic. You need to be thinking about your nervous system, your mental health, your diet, your environment, like epigenetics, who's around you, what are you doing, where are you living, what's your job, what sort of people do you surround yourself with? All of these contribute to a recovery from chronic illness. And yeah, I don't think they had that understanding. I didn't have that understanding. And I guess parents, like they want you to, well, my parents definitely, I get the sense that any parent does, when their child is sick, they want them just to be better ASAP. They don't want to have to take on that load. And it's probably really unbearable for them to see someone that they love, their own child, being in such distress and such an unhappy time. They probably just want them better as soon as possible and like a quick fix solution, when in reality, it's taken years to get where I am now.
Yeah. No, no, definitely. Yeah, and then I'd say that's the same as my parents as well. And so could you take us through a little bit? So you mentioned that obviously you went online and how that helped and stuff, but could you talk us through kind of like, obviously it took you a year to get the diagnosis. So that's, 1 year into the 5.5 years. How long did you continue down the traditional medical route before you actually started to look at alternative things? And then what else did you start to try then?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that happened was within a few months. So I got it in March March 2018, March 2019. And then by end of April, I was on antidepressants. Classic. It's just like, cool, you've got these symptoms. Let's put you on some antidepressants. And to be fair, I was in a really bad place. And you know, what came first, I can't quite tell you. I think I was probably in a bad place, but it was manifesting in lots of obsessive behaviors. Then I became ill. Then I got prescribed antidepressants. But the trauma from having this like overnight debilitating illness definitely contributed to poor mental health. So I was in this sort of vicious cycle. One had caused one and then had like precipitated the other. So yeah, I had probably needed to go on them. That was the first thing. I am disclosure, I am still on these tablets because it's an absolute nightmare to get off. Like 5.5 years later, I've tried so many times to come off them and I'm finding it so hard. And I have this deep insecurity that these tablets are just masking um, like a whole load of problems that I haven't tackled yet. Supposedly, they're supposed to be there to help you, work through all of these things, which I think they have to an extent. But I definitely find it difficult not to be on them. I've tried, like, I've cut my dose in half several times. I am on that half dose at the moment, and I've tried to cut it down again, but I cannot get past half a dose. So anyway, that's me 5.5 years later. I had received some psychological help. I had some psychology appointments with an ME specialist psychologist. Um, I also had a physio because I was dealing with a lot of like chronic pain as well at the time. That came on, which I thought was a result of going back to exercise too quickly after a period of break. But those symptoms have never gone either. And I have since been diagnosed with fibromyalgia or chronic pain. So I received some treatment for that. I think after that year, once I'd had all of these things, then I started to look into other things. I began doing Pilates, and that was just started by a couple of YouTube videos. I was really addicted to exercise at the time. So any sort of movement was something I just had to do. It was just like a non-negotiable. I had to, even if I was lying on the mat and lifting a leg in the air, I was like, okay, I'm doing something, which was fully an addiction. I really wasn't doing anything helpful. And it definitely wasn't, at the very start, probably wasn't what I needed in my recovery. But I did begin to do much slower, much more mindful, much shorter periods on the mat. So like 10 minutes of like lifting one knee into tabletop, tapping the toe down, lifting the other knee up, tapping the toe down. And this slow exercise was quite transformational. Over the last few years, I'm come to understand exercise from a completely different perspective. I used to see it as something that had to be vigorous, high impact. You had to be sweating, had to be cardiovascular. And now I barely do any cardio. I do Pilates, I do reformer Pilates a lot. I teach that as well. So that's what I do as my job now. So that's completely changed since being ill. And I do some strength training. So completely different. So I'm really veering away from the topic here. But
That's fine.
essentially, if I was to link that back to recovery, I think, yeah, slow, mindful exercise was a really huge part of that and a great way to unlearn past behaviors, past mindsets that I had that exercise and basically life had to be quite difficult for it to be productive and worth it.
Mm. Would I think there's so many interesting things that can come out of what you just said, and actually a lot of parallels to like what I've been through, which I'm sorry I always have to do because it's I always find this interesting. It's very very selfish of me, this podcast, but it's
Oh,
easy.
I find it so interesting as well because I like hearing about other people's experiences of this, and it feels weird when you're on a podcast and you're just like talking to yourself and sharing your recovery. It can feel so self-indulgent, and I'm actually really welcoming any
Yeah,
comments you have right now about your experiences.
good. Well, I guess I was more saying it for also the audience who probably heard me say these things numerous times. But anyway, I don't care. So no, what you said about movement. So for me, I am and continue to be convinced that my main issue is like an issue with my nervous system, and then you know as a knock on effect my immune system, and so getting my nervous system regulated is the most important thing. So I tried to do all of the like brain retraining and the typical things that you did, like gut to all of that kind of stuff. And I just found it really, really difficult. And I've said it in so many times on this podcast, but also I think because it felt really difficult and it felt like a chore, it was like I was forcing myself to do it. And then I'd kind of beat myself up because it wasn't going right. And then that in itself was like probably messing up my nervous system and all of that kind of stuff. And then it was only when I really started to kind of like build strength through exercise and I like exercise has just always just been massive for me. that
Mm.
that in itself was training my nervous system in itself. And I saw you did a post on Instagram and you said, nervous system regulation can look like this and, the typical
Mm.
things. And then you also had, being around, I think it was like being around people you love, like, exercise and that kind of thing. And I thought that was a really good post because I think people can probably beat themselves up a little bit too much about trying to do all the things that are in the workbook or whatever it is, but actually there's a lot of other stuff that you can do as well that are just, I don't know about for you, but I think a lot of it's just getting back to an enjoyment and a joy in your life, but also just building an inner belief and strength again after feeling so weak for so long. Um, Sorry, now I've got on a tangent as well, but does that resonate
Oh,
with?
I'm loving I'm totally engrossed in what you're saying. Totally. It's about, like, finding balance. I
Mm,
don't know about you, but before I got ill, it was just like I was in my path and nothing was gonna get in the way. I'd, like, turned down social events. I turned down anything that was, like, relatively fun because it wasn't gonna lead to in my mind, it wasn't gonna lead to a productive outcome. And that post that you mentioned was all about how I've relearned how to regulate myself. And that can be, how many times have you been feeling quite symptomy and or just not really up for going out for a social event or not really up for doing what you said you were going to do. And then you go and you feel so much better. And just being around people that lift you up, that like regulate your nervous system, doing things that you love, like really channeling your creativity, whether that's through cooking, through sport, through I don't know, scrapbooking, photography, whatever it is that you do that is personal and lifts you up, that's important in your nervous system regulation. And like you just said, with your sport, if that's always been an important part of your life, it was for me as well. And so it was always going to be a natural part of my recovery. Although I had an unhealthy relationship with exercise before I got ill, I've now retrained myself and tried to, relearn how to exercise in a positive way. I do enjoy it, and I now exercise for enjoyment rather than just to like don't know, burn some calories or like look good. It's not for aesthetic reasons. It's well, I mean, obviously all of that's lovely, but trying not to put pressure on myself. If I go out and I on a run and I have pain, which I often do, then I just slow down the run. I maybe jog for a bit, I walk for a bit, I jog and walk. And then some days I will have a really good, depending on where I am sort of in my cycle as well, like hormones really impact females' ability to all their energy production. So yeah, that I really started to listen to my body and just go with the flow a bit more, which doesn't come naturally, but we've learned a lot in the last few years.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I could talk a lot about this subject. So I think it's really interesting. I do feel anyone listening to this, like trying to get yourself doing some form of exercise consistently, regularly over a long period of time. Because I don't know about you, but for me, it wasn't like an immediate thing that I just suddenly just started to feel better or I noticed things started to shift. I had to do this for quite a long time. And it took me taking like very little steps at the beginning. And so it's difficult to stick with something there when you don't see a lot of improvement at the beginning because we just want to feel better now. How
Yeah.
how quickly did you start to notice like improvements? Because I know you said you felt good when you were doing it, but in terms of like your overall like health and symptoms, how quickly did you start to notice anything change or shift?
Um, I never noticed any sudden shifts. It's all been so incremental.
Yeah.
I think I was probably like a couple of years into my recovery when lockdown happened, and that was really instrumental in slowing down. It was a forced way to just chill for a bit and focus on things that actually matter, like being around family, a healthy family, being at home, being in the garden. I have memories of lockdown. I have lovely memories of lockdown. Like just being, I was ill, but the sun was always shining in my mind. It was just like permanently summer. We spent a lot of time outdoors. We did a lot of like walking. I moved back in with my family. We got a little puppy, and all of these things in that year really, I definitely started to see some changes then. but it was, yeah, all slow. And that was just a result of like being out of my head and like more mindful of what was going on around me and kind of reverting back to a childlike self. I didn't have as many responsibilities. I was living with my parents who were very much like, parenting and in charge. And that just like letting go of that responsibility was really helpful in just trying to like reconnect with who I was before I got ill and the years leading up to being ill. Um, and then post that, little changes in my life, like moving back to London after that, moving in with some friends, really close old friends that also reminded me of who I was before, like before any of this happened. Um, and getting a new job, enjoying my job, having other things to focus on, and in the background, developing this like love for Pilates, developing a business on the side, something I was really passionate about. That was like my little project that I was building up confidence in. But, we talked about self belief and relearning like how to look after yourself, how to be proud of yourself, all fits in with like regulation of the nervous system. So yeah, building up something I loved and I was confident in and was building up a community. I started searching about, I did an online program about how to regulate your nervous system and with, is it EFT, the tapping?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
did all that, the lightning process, um, and just changing my lifestyle and working on my thoughts and really deep rooted beliefs that I didn't know I had, which I still am working with now. And it is fascinating to think about what kind of beliefs you've held since you were really young and
Right.
how those beliefs play into absolutely everything you do. And I could go to town on like all these different beliefs, but like right at the core of it is I really didn't believe that I was good enough. I thought that everything I did was, I just had to work so much harder than everybody else to be proud of myself. And that's something I'm, yeah, just working with at the moment still, 5.5 years on. And I don't think I would have been able to tell you that even a year ago. But there's so much stuff. And I urge anyone going through this or anyone, whether you are or not, just to think about what those core beliefs are, analyze them, interrogate them, break them down, and maybe just install new beliefs. Like start to retrain your brain to approach things differently because the way you think of the world, the way you think about yourself ultimately impacts all your behaviors and can lead to really like physical ailments.
Mm.
And we have the power mentally, I think, to change that.
I think there's a couple of like really interesting things there. First of all, like you you move location like twice and changed your environment, and something that again go back to me, but it shifted quite a lot for me was when I left London, and I remember doing I've taken a little bits from each of the courses that I've like done, and one of them I remember talking about pattern interrupt, like talking about um brushing your teeth with the other hand and stuff like that, but an environment
Oh,
change, like
really?
quite yeah. I mean, I think I did it for a day, and then I was like, I'm fed up of getting toothpaste all over my face. So, um, but it's interesting that those, I imagine, those environmental changes that you took, maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, actually helped because kind of you weren't in that same environment that kind of got you sick, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I remember someone saying really early on in my recovery, if you want to, no, I remember this is funny. I went to my ME psychologist, and she said, "What do you hope to gain from these sessions?" And I said, "Oh, fantastic! I'm so glad you asked. I would like to just get back to exactly where I was before I got ill. I'd like to be exercising every day. I'd like to be working my long hours and feeling hyper productive." And she just stared at me with this absolute horror and said, "No, no, 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 no. The whole point, the only way you're going to be able to recover is to alleviate all of those factors that led you to becoming seriously ill." And I was like, no, 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 no. I couldn't comprehend it. Anyway, I've since learned that that is exactly what I needed to do. Like the stress, the obsession with exercise and eating healthily being productive and isolating myself from all my friends, focusing on work as like my only source of like value and validation, that was never going to be productive or conducive to good health. So I have slowly, and still working on it, slowly just adjusting my life, making small changes, changing who I hang out with more, where I am, how much time I spend in nature versus in the city, uh, having a work-life balance, finding a work, and I'm still not there yet, but finding work that allows me to live the life I want to live, but also has that good work-life balance, gives me meaning, and where I'm like helping people and still learning lots. Um, so currently I'm a full-time Pilates teacher, which is as of a few months ago, and I still have this gut, I don't know, this intuition says it's the right thing to do because every job that comes up, I'm like, no, I don't want to apply to that. But there's so many voices in my head and core beliefs that says that's not a worthy profession. What are you doing? That's not what people like you do. And I'm just, and I know it's the right thing to do, but it's like a constant battle. Like, am I doing the right thing? What do I want to do? Maybe life is so short. What is the point in sticking at something for the sake of like job security every single month and being able to pay a mortgage? Like, why don't you just do something that actually gives you joy and balance?
I just my advice. I think you can have both. I don't think you need to. You don't need
Mm,
to. You don't need to be this Pilates instructor that I don't know. Not ambitious and not creating things and not earning loads of money. Which is, by the way, is totally fine if you want to earn loads of money as well. Like that's
yeah.
and I think you can have all of those things, and because you're clearly a very like ambitious person as well, and I still think, and you want to achieve things. So I think, and this is my advice. This is because I kind of went the other way, like you did, and I was like, oh well, I need to just go and just take the most
Be a
non-stress.
monk.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I still have this in me, and if I don't scratch that itch, it's gonna, it's gonna annoy me. But
Mm.
also, I knew I didn't want to go and work for like a big company in the city and all of that kind of stuff. So I think you're doing the right thing, in my opinion. You're doing the right thing, but you can just, I would focus personally on making whatever you're doing into something, big and as big as you want it to be, but that it still serves, your life. That's what I would do, and that's kind of what I'm personally trying to do as well.
That's so good to hear. That's very inspiring. And I will definitely take that advice. And
Thanks.
I think that's where I'm heading. You can definitely like working for yourself as well. And I know a lot of people who have had ME and start to recover from working for themselves because you have those natural personality traits that make you a good business owner, like the whole type A personality type, like that drive to work hours. It can be dangerous as well, but like work hours outside of that 9 to 5 or work hours that suit you and yeah, have that flexibility. But you get so much enjoyment from the creative side of having a business and doing your own thing, which I think is instrumental into chronic illness recovery.
100%. I'm very conscious that we're running out of time, and I'm a bit worried someone might end up
Yeah.
kicking me out of this room. But I do want to ask you. I do want to ask you. Yeah, I think something else I just wanted to like mention. I do think it's like really inspiring to people as well. The like the gradual side of what your progression, and that it's not that noticeable until you actually take stock, which it's just so similar to me. And I think that's comforting to a lot of
Mm,
people rather than hearing a lot of these overnight success stories that make them punish themselves because they're not, achieving another overnight success story. So I think that's
mhm.
amazing. What would be your advice to someone now who's kind of, in their darkest hour, who's really finding it struggling to move forward and believe in their recovery?
Wow, I would say so many things to you. And the first of all is just like have some self compassion. This is a really rubbish situation to be in. but I promise you it will get better. It's only going to go up from where you are right now. Just think of a graph and think of that line just going up. It might be a slow increase, but it is going to go up. If I think about where I am now versus that day I got ill and I couldn't walk a few steps, I can now run. And that might be 5.5 years on, but it happens. Just be curious about the whole process. Don't take it too much. Don't make it your next big project to like recover as soon as possible, but be curious about that slow transition into this like new you. You have got this opportunity to do all of this work on yourself before but before anybody else does. No, it's quite rare unless you've had a chronic illness, like to actually sit down, like work on like your core beliefs and what you really want from life, who you really are, like what's holding you back. That is an incredible opportunity that you can delve into over a number of years, and you can live your best life. I'm not there yet, but I'm nearly there, and I can see the difference in who I am now as a person compared to who I was when I got ill, and I like myself so much more now, and that could be you as well. So
Yeah, I
just
mean,
use it as an opportunity, enjoy the process and love yourself.
amazing. Well, I can, even just through our conversation here, I can see how amazing this has been for you. As weird and as messed up as that sounds, how amazing this has been for you because of what it's providing for you in your life. So, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing that wisdom at the end there and throughout. If someone wants to get in contact with you to ask you any questions about today, is that okay? And if so, how would they do that?
Yeah, of course. I really welcome anyone getting in touch. I'd love to talk to anyone. And I also run, if you have any questions, get in touch. But I also run Pilates for ME and CFS sessions. So please, and even if you don't have that diagnosis, but you have similar symptoms, then it could be a nice session for you. So do get in touch via Instagram or on my email, which I'll leave both with you, Phil.
Yeah, perfect. We'll leave it in the show notes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sophie. Yeah, look, so excited to get this one out. I know so many people will get so much from it, so really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.